I am Beyond 5150, the inpatient of this asylum that you have now entered. I will show you things you wish you had never been shown. This will now be your world. Sadly, you won't be able to leave, as you have been officially committed for at least the next few hours. Just sit back, enjoy your time, because until you've been released, you will have to suffer the rest of us. Also, there's no milk and cookies. Alright, so the first story that we will be doing this evening is actually one I have written myself. We'll wait for a moment while this webcam finally turns on, which should be momentarily. I please apologize for this slight delay, technical difficulties. Obviously, this is the first stream, so there will be difficulties. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. I have a nice list of stories planned for you guys this evening, so let's get started. I think. Okay, so I want you guys all to relax as I make some minor adjustments to the camera setup, because I have this set up here because this is a window that I have 3 monitors going on here. The one I'll be reading from is over here where the camera is, so you guys will all have a chance to see me making a fool of myself. Okay, so we'll get started now. You guys enjoy. This is Screams in the Night, written by myself. Hope you guys all enjoy. It was a dark and foggy night. The kind of night in which all nightmares begin. James looked out of his bedroom window and opened it. It was still quite warm tonight, and James figured he could use some fresh air. Besides, his room was on the top floor of his home, and there just wasn't any way for someone to try to get in through his window. James looked out into the muggy night, watching the fog creep out of the forest into the small field adjacent to his house, appreciating the calming sounds of the night, the wind blowing through the trees, the crickets and the frogs singing their nightly songs, and the occasional owl hoot. James stepped away from his window and began shuffling to his bed to get some much-needed sleep when, out of nowhere, all the sounds of the night just abruptly stopped. Not a single sound slipped into his room from the open window, not even the sound of the wind in the trees or the tall grass of that field. James came to a rather sudden halt and strained to listen for anything, thinking maybe it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. As he fought to hear anything, the hair on his neck began to stand up. Okay, so clearly we are having some difficulty. I apologize. The network stream is not the best. Please apologize for me. I apologize. I think what we're going to have to do is not do a webcam because it's just too much of this. So I think that's what we're going to go ahead and do, and just we'll go ahead and just put a little window up saying that the stream is going. This is going to be only audio. I do apologize. Our network is just not the greatest at this time, so please forgive me with that. So bear with me one moment while I get that up, and then we'll continue with the story. If I can make this work. That's not going to do it. Nope. So I do again apologize that this has kind of given everybody some difficulty here. Um, I think what we'll go ahead and do is maybe just put a image up. So bear with me one moment. There we go. Okay, so this should pop up shortly, and we'll go ahead and continue. Please let me know if there are any issues with people's audio, with the audio again. Obviously, I apologize. I have lowered the settings. I'll see if I can lower them any further. I think the problem is my network is, unfortunately, we have some difficulty here, so I do apologize that that is the case. I was hoping that would not be a problem, but unfortunately that became the problem. So we're just going to move on with what we got and go from there. I hope this works. Please just let me know if there's any other issues going further, and we'll kind of go from there. I apologize again. People's audio again. Alrighty, so back to the story here. I apologize. I have lowered the settings. Let's see if I can lower them any further. All right. I think the problem is my network is, unfortunately, have some difficulty here, so... James stepped away from his window and began shuffling to his bed to get some much-needed sleep when, out of nowhere, all the sounds in the night just abruptly stopped. Not a single sound slipped into his room from the open window, not even the sound of the wind in the trees and tall grass of the fields. James came to a rather sudden halt and strained to listen for anything, thinking maybe it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. As he fought to hear anything, the hair on his neck began to stand up. Goosebumps began popping up on his arms, and a deep, cold chill ran down his spine. James started to rationalize the situation, struggling to reason with his sudden fear. It's just probably a bear or something that just scared all the animals. You know, the wind can pretty easily stop at any time. There's nothing to be freaking out about. Calm your shit, James. Calm your shit. It's completely normal. It's completely normal. Suck it up. Stop being a bitch. James slid under his covers and pounded his pillow into shape, and then flopped his head onto the somewhat now semi-perfect pillow, determined to get that rest he felt he deserved. Just as he began to drift off, a blood-curdling scream slammed into his ears. Jolting upright, James listened intently, hoping and praying that it was just a dream. And just as that thought crossed his mind, another death-vending scream was heard. James bounded out of his bed and in a single large step reached his window. Thrusting his head out, James searched the area he could see, hoping it was just some kids screwing around. Seeing nothing, James listened intently and began to hear more screams, drifting over the fog. The blood began to pound in his body, his pulse now more palpable in his fingers. The adrenaline, pouring into his bloodstream, kick-started his instincts. James sprinted out of his room, down the hall, and taking 2 steps at a time, bolted down his stairs and out the door. As he threw his front door open, memories began to intrude into his mind. The continued screaming brought back the memory of his time in Fallujah, where his assistant gunner was hit with an RPG. It caused his legs to shatter and hang on with just the slightest bit of skin. His buddy's screams became a haunting memory that was brought back with flashes of that traumatic event. The screams he heard tonight made him lost in his past for a split moment. But James shook out the memories of his former life from his mind, intent on determining what was going on in his hometown. James sprinted as fast as he could down the main street from his home, down into the town center, his muscles burning with the exertion, his lungs greedily sucking in the air. Just as he reached the next street that led to the town center, James skidded to an halt, his feet sliding on the gravel as he saw something laying just off the sidewalk. It was small, no bigger than his arm, and it was only lit by a streetlight half a block away. James walked over to it to examine, as it just seemed out of the place. Just as he leaned over to look closer, he recoiled in fear. It was no bigger than his arm because it was an arm. The flesh looking shredded as if it was torn off rather than cut. His stomach recoiled and he nearly retched, but James swallowed hard and turned back to the town center, desperate to find out what was going on. Just as he reached the main roundabout that sat in front of Town Hall, he began to notice dark patches everywhere. As he strode past Town Hall, he realized the dark patches were actually large puddles of blood. The street lights lit up the bodies strewn everywhere, arms torn off, heads twisted in full 180s, and massive slashes across the bodies. James' heart started to pound even harder as he now thought of his girlfriend Lacey, who lived only a block away. Terror sat deep in his heart as he began to sprint again, this time towards her house. All he could think of was her. Oh God, please, oh God, no, let me reach her in time. Just as he skidded around the corner to her house, he could hear the screams. Just as he skidded around the corner to her house, he could hear the screams begin to trail off, almost as if there just wasn't anyone left to slaughter. Her house was now only a few hundred meters away, the light of her porch now visible to him. Once James was only about 50 meters from her house, he began to notice a foul smell. As he frantically looked around, he saw just off her porch a dark shape with foul green eyes. A massive, hulking outline became clear to him as it rose to his feet. At that moment, the front door opened. Lacey's father stepped out with a baseball bat. Her father stepped toward the bushes off the porch slowly, eyes panning around for anything amiss. Before James could open his mouth to warn him, Lacey stepped out of the doorway. Finally, James was able to blurt out the shout of warning. "William! Watch out!" It's too late. In only a fraction of a second, the thing grabbed William by the throat. Lacey let out a shriek of terror, and in what seemed like slow motion, that thing looked at James, and with what James saw was a smile, simply flexed its hand and snapped William's neck. No! The scream of horror simultaneously came from both Lacey and James. Without thinking, James scooped up a branch laying into the yard next to him and bolted toward the creature. His arms raised high above and, letting out a warrior's scream, swung a branch down with all his might. The branch exploded into splinters, the shock vibrating up his arms, making his hands numb. And yet, as he stared in wonder, the creature simply shrugged. James stared, dumbfounded that this monster was unscathed by his attack, and never noticed his arm swing. A flash of pain and red was all James could feel and see at that moment. As the sudden shock wore off, he began to feel wetness of his blood. As James tried to look around, he noticed that his left eye just wasn't working, and all he could see was from his right eye. He also became immediately aware of the agonizing pain exploding from his head, and that he was lying on the ground just at the bottom of Lacey's steps. James's vision began to grow red and dim, almost throbbing. As he tried to take stock in his situation, another blood-curdling scream burst through the air. "Lacey! Lacey! 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 Lacey!" The world faded away and finally went black as James passed out from shock and blood loss. James awoke several hours later. A deep gash now runs from the side of his forehead down across his left eye and terminating in his cheek. His one good eye narrows in fury and revenge. Okay, so that was the end of that story. Again, I did write this one. This is called Screams in the Night. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and do one of my favorite stories ever written. Gosh darn with the buffering.